The ledger was open to the last page of figures she had written the night before. She stood on the porch in the gray before sunrise, her breath faint in the cold air, and read down the column the way her father had taught her. Not looking for comfort, looking for truth. The numbers were accurate. She had made certain of that 3 times. 23 days of work visible in her own handwriting. Each entry precise and small, the ink still bright against the worn paper. 1 day left. She closed the ledger and held it against her chest for a moment, looking out at the land. The frost had come in overnight, and the grass lay silver and still in every direction. Somewhere past the fence line, the cattle moved, slow shapes in the early gray. The candle in the tin holder on the windowsill behind her had burned itself to nothing in the night. She went inside to light another. She had stepped off the noon train in Caldera on the 22nd of October, with one trunk and a sewing basket she had tied shut that morning with a strip of leather because the latch had broken 3 weeks before, and she had not had occasion to fix it yet. The platform was not empty. It was never empty at noon, which she understood even before she arrived. A small town on flat land with one rail line running through it. The train was an event, whether anyone admitted it or not. She felt the watching before she saw the faces. A woman near the ticket window with a basket over her arm. 2 men at the far end of the platform pretending to talk about something else. A girl of about 12 sitting on a crate who did not pretend at all. She set her trunk down and straightened. She had learned early that there were 2 ways to be looked at when you had nothing. You could fold under it, or you could stand so that the looking had nowhere to stick. She stood. Her dress was clean and her back was level, and the sewing basket hung from her left hand like it weighed nothing. The man she had written to was not on the platform. She had known, from the letters, that he was not a man who made gestures toward comfort. The arrangements had been practical on both sides. She had written that she could cook, manage a household, handle accounts, and work as hard as the season required. He had written back that he had 3 children and a place outside of town, and that the room would be hers. The letters were neither warm nor cold. They were the letters of 2 people solving a problem and not pretending otherwise. She picked up her trunk by the handle and walked toward the station door. The girl on the crate watched her the whole way. He was standing just inside the station door, hat in hand, turning it once by the brim. He was taller than she had expected from nothing at all. She had formed no picture, and he had the look of a man who had been working since before the sun was up for so many years that it had stopped being something he thought about. His face was weathered in the particular way of men who spent their days outside and their evenings going over numbers that did not improve. He did not offer his hand first. He looked at her trunk and at her and said she must be her. She said she was. He took the trunk. That was all. No pleasantry, no apology for the plain reception, no comment on the journey. He carried the trunk to the wagon as if it were a thing that needed carrying, and that was reason enough. She climbed up without waiting for assistance. He noticed. He did not say so. The road out of Caldera ran flat through grass that had gone gold and then past gold to something drier. The sky was the kind of blue that had no warmth in it. She sat with the sewing basket on her lap and watched the land open up and did not fill the quiet. After a while, he told her there were 3 children. A boy of 9, a girl of 7, and the youngest, not yet 5. He said the place had 12 head of cattle and 1 milk cow and a kitchen garden that had not done well this year. He said the debt was manageable. She looked at the grass moving at the edge of the road. She said nothing. The word manageable had a specific shape when a man said it that way. Level, facing forward, not looking at her. She had heard her father use the same shape. She had been 11 the first time, and believed him. She had been older every time after, and each time the word had meant something slightly worse than the last. The ranch came into view in the late afternoon, the roof of the house low against the sky, a fence line that needed attention on the north side, a smokehouse behind the main building with a lean she could see from the road. The children were not in the yard. He unhitched the horse, and she carried her own trunk to the door he indicated. The room was small and held a bed and a window that faced west. She set the basket down on the floor and looked at the window for a moment. That evening she cooked from what was in the kitchen: potatoes, salt pork, 2 eggs she found in the coop, and when supper was done and the children were in bed and the man had gone out to check the stock, she opened her trunk. The candle was near the top, a tallow stub in a tin holder, dented on one side. She set it on the kitchen windowsill and lit it. The flame caught and held. The candle had burned down to a 1/4 inch by the time she slept. She woke before light, which was a habit older than any place she'd lived. The house was quiet in the way that means everyone is still sleeping, and she dressed without a lamp and went to the kitchen. The candle had gone out on its own. She noted that and moved past it. The kitchen drawer held the expected things: a length of twine, a broken buckle, 3 nails of different sizes, and a woman's thimble that did not belong to her, which she recognized without looking at it again. The ledger was beneath all of it, flat and brown. The cover warped at the corner from having been wet once and dried poorly. She set it on the table. Inside the front cover, tucked without folding, was the letter. She read it once quickly, the way you do when you suspect a thing and need to confirm the shape of it. Then she read it again, slowly. $340, November 14th. She put the letter back in the same orientation she had found it and closed the ledger and replaced it in the drawer beneath the twine and the buckle. She stood at the counter for a moment with both hands flat on the wood. 23 days. He had not told her. She turned this over briefly, not with anger, and set it down. A man who puts an advertisement in the paper 2 years after his wife dies, 1 week after his son stops eating supper, does not tell the woman who answers it everything at once. She had known men who had done worse by way of omission. She would not spend a morning on it. She found a sheet of paper in the same drawer, folded small, and a pencil worn to a stub. She sat down at the table and began to write. The list was not dramatic. It was the kind of list her father had made when they were trying to save something and still had enough time to save it. What they had, what it was worth, what could move quickly and what couldn't. 12 cattle, 1 milk cow, a kitchen garden that had gone to weed at the edges but had not entirely surrendered, a smokehouse roof she'd need to see up close, the fence on the north side. She wrote a second column. What it would take. She was 3 lines into it when she heard the barn door. She did not look up. She kept the pencil moving, following a thought about the garden. Whether anything in it was still viable, whether the soil had been turned at all this year. She could feel him in the doorway from across the yard. The way you feel a weather change before the clouds arrive. He did not come inside. She wrote the word preserves and underlined it once. She went out to the garden before the dew had burned off. It was worse than the ledger suggested and better than she'd feared. The rows had collapsed into each other at the far end, and something, dear, more likely than neglect, had taken the late squash down to stems. But the soil held. She crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the earth near the south edge, and it came away damp and dark. Someone had watered it, at least into September. Not faithfully, but enough. She walked each row slowly, carrots still in the ground, gone woody but present. A stand of dried bean plants with pods still clinging. Kale that had bolted but hadn't given up entirely. At the northwest corner, half hidden under a sprawl of dead vines, 3 jars worth of green tomatoes, small and hard and absolutely salvageable if she moved today. She straightened, looked at the fence along the garden's east edge. 3 posts leaning, 1 split at the soil line. That was how the deer had come through. She made a note in her head the way her father had taught her. Fix the entrance before you tend the interior. She went back inside and added fence posts, east garden to the 2nd column. Then she found him at the barn. He was forking hay, his back to her. He turned when she stopped at the door, but he didn't set the fork down. She said the horse had a cracked shoe on the left foreleg. He didn't ask how she knew. He looked at her for a moment, the way a person looks at weather, reading it, not contesting it. She said she needed the horse sound by the end of the week. He nodded once and turned back to the hay. She went to the smokehouse. The roof was worse from the inside than from the ground. 1 beam had sagged and pulled 2 rows of shingles apart, and the gap ran nearly 18 inches along the east pitch. But the frame was solid oak, and the walls were sound. She stood in the dim interior with the light coming through in a single long stripe across the earthen floor. And she thought, one day, 2 at the outside. Cedar shingles if there were any at the general store. If not, sawn pine would hold through winter. She walked back to the kitchen and started on the tomatoes. By mid-afternoon, she had 2 dozen small jars sorted and washed, and the kitchen smelled of vinegar and wood smoke. She could hear him at the far end of the yard, the ring of a hammer on iron, steady and unhurried. She did not look out the window, but she counted the strokes the way you count distant thunder, measuring the distance between things. He was still at it when the light began to drop. She lit the tallow candle on the windowsill and went back to her list. The youngest found her on the 4th morning. She was at the kitchen table with the account ledger open, a cup of coffee cooling at her elbow, and she heard the small feet on the stairs before she saw him. He appeared in the doorway in his nightshirt, hair pressed flat on one side, and stood looking at her with the specific seriousness of a 4-year-old who has decided something. She did not make a sound toward him. She turned a page. He crossed the kitchen in 6 steps and sat down on the floor beside her chair. That was all. He did not ask for anything. He simply sat, his back against the chair leg, watching the hem of her skirt the way small children watch fires, without a plan for what they will do next, but certain they will stay. After a few minutes, he stood and handed her the candle snuffer from the shelf near the window. She did not need it. She took it anyway and set it on the table beside her pen. He sat back down. She worked through the morning with him there. When she moved to the stove, he followed. When she crossed to the larder, he waited in the middle of the floor until she came back. She handed him small things to hold. a wooden spoon, an empty jar, a folded cloth. And he held each one with both hands and said nothing, and seemed to find this entirely sufficient. The 7-year-old appeared in the doorway after breakfast, as she had appeared in every doorway since the first day. She never came in. She stood at the threshold with one hand on the frame and watched her brother on the floor and watched the woman at the stove, and her face did not move. But she stayed longer than she had the day before. At supper, the 9-year-old sat with his back angled away, as he had every night. He ate. He did not speak. When she set the bread near his plate, he did not look at it for a long moment, and then he took a piece. She noticed. She did not let him see that she had. After the children cleared their plates and went upstairs, she stayed at the table with the ledger. The rancher stayed too. He did not say anything. He had his coffee, and he turned the cup slowly in his hands, the way a man does when he is not thinking about the cup. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind that forms when two people have been working in the same direction all day and have run out of reasons to leave. The candle burned on the windowsill. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the yard in low passes, lifting nothing, just making its presence known. The flame held steady in the glass. He stayed until his coffee was gone. Then he pushed back his chair and went to bed. She turned to the next page of the ledger and kept working. She was up before the children. The sky outside the kitchen window was still the color of ash, and the yard was quiet except for the horse shifting in the stall. She had read the ledger again by candlelight after the rancher went to bed, and she had done the arithmetic 3 ways to make sure the number was the same each time. It was 6 jars and 2 days. That was what she had to offer. She dressed, tied the sewing basket's leather strap twice, and went to the root cellar. The preserves were on the second shelf, 8 jars from what she'd put up the week before, the plum ones with wax sealed tight across the lids. She counted out 6 and set them carefully into the basket, wrapped in cloth so they would not knock against each other on the road. She left a note on the table for the oldest boy. Porridge on the stove. Lid on. Do not let your brother stand on the chair. She thought about adding something else. She did not. The widow's farm was 2 miles east, past the bend where the road dipped and then rose again. She had gotten the direction from the woman at the general store, the one who watched without appearing to. And she had asked it the way she asked most things, plainly and without explanation, as if the information were simply information. She walked the first mile before the sky lightened. The second mile she walked in the early gray of morning with the dew still sitting on the grass along the road's edge, her boots darkening at the toe. The widow came to the door before she knocked. An older woman, compact and steady, who looked at the basket and then at her face and said nothing for a moment. Then she opened the door wider. They sat at the table and the widow poured 2 cups without asking. She set the preserves out on the table one by one, jars catching the morning light, and she said what she had come to say. 6 jars, 2 days of shared labor, her hands available for whatever the widow needed done. In exchange, a second milk cow, if one was available. The widow looked at the jars for a moment. Then she said yes. There was no ceremony to it. They finished their coffee. The widow walked her out to the pen and showed her the cow, a brown and white animal, calm, with good eyes. They arranged the 2 days for the following week. She thanked the widow and started back down the road with the cow's rope in her hand, walking the 2 miles home in the full morning light. She put the cow in the pen and went inside to start dinner. At dusk, she heard him come in from the north field. She heard his footsteps cross the yard and then stop. A long pause. The kind a man makes when something has changed and he is not yet sure what it means. Then the door opened and he came inside. He did not ask. She did not explain. The plums had come from a thicket at the fence's south end, small and dark, more tart than sweet. She had picked them over 2 evenings while the light held, the youngest sitting nearby pulling at grass. The apples were from 3 old trees at the garden's edge. Gnarled things, badly pruned, but the fruit was sound. She had processed through the night twice, the kitchen filling with steam and the sharp bright smell of hot sugar and skin. 22 jars. She set 14 aside for the store. Wednesday morning, she loaded them into the wagon bed wrapped in burlap and told him she needed to go into Caldera. He said nothing, only went to hitch the horse. When he came back to the yard, the eldest boy was standing at the wagon wheel, not asking, just standing there in the way children stand when they want to be included and will not say so. She looked at him. He looked at the wagon. She said he could come if he wanted. He climbed in without a word and sat at the far end of the bench. They drove the 4 miles in silence. The road was dry and the sky above the grass was high and pale. She kept her eyes on the track ahead. He kept his on the fields. The general store sat at the center of Caldera's main street, wide-fronted, with barrels on the porch and a painted sign above the door. She carried the crate in herself. The storekeeper was a man in his 50s with spectacles and ink on his left hand. He looked at the jars the way a man looks at something he is trying not to want too quickly. She named her price per jar on consignment. He examined one of the plum jars, held it to the light from the window, set it down. He took 14. He counted them out one by one onto the counter and wrote the agreement in his ledger in careful numbers. She watched him write. When he was finished, he looked up and she nodded once. She turned to go. The boy was standing 3 feet back from the counter. He had been there the whole time, still and quiet, watching the storekeeper's hand move across the ledger. Now his eyes moved to her, not to her face exactly, but to the space just beside it, the way a person looks when they are thinking rather than seeing. She walked past him toward the door. He followed. They were a 1/4 mile out of town before he spoke. The words came out flat and careful, the way a 9-year-old speaks when he has been holding a question long enough that it is worn smooth. Did you plan that? She kept her eyes on the road ahead. The grass moved in a long, slow wave off to the east. Yes, she said. He did not ask anything else. But when she glanced over, he was facing forward too, watching the road the same way she was. They came back to a quiet house. The girl had kept the youngest occupied. She could hear them in the back room, something low and rhythmic, a counting game. She went straight to the kitchen and opened the ledger on the table. The numbers had not changed since she last wrote them, but she had been carrying others in her head for 3 days, waiting until they were certain. She sat down and wrote them in. The calf, sold to a rancher passing through on the 15th, $11 even. The 2 days at the widow's place, harvesting and pressing, She had taken her wages in coin rather than credit, and the widow had paid fair, $4.50. The preserves running at Garfield's had moved faster than she'd projected. He'd sent word through the boy that he needed 6 more jars before the week was out. She added the column twice, then a third time. $110 retired since she arrived. 230 remaining. 8 days left. She closed the ledger and left it open on the table. She did not watch him find it. She was in the garden turning the last of the frost-bitten squash when she heard the door, and she kept her back to the house. The youngest was somewhere behind her, carrying a tin pail he had appointed himself in charge of. She listened to the boy drop something into it with great ceremony. When she came inside an hour later, he was still at the table. He had not moved the ledger. He was not looking at it either. It was open in front of him, but his eyes were on the window, the middle distance, the kind of stillness that has been there long enough to settle. She went around him to the stove. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. The children ate supper. He ate. She ate. The candle on the sill burned down to its last quarter-inch, and she replaced it from the 3 she kept in the tin beside the basin. She had learned by now how fast they went. She was already in bed when she heard it. A single strike of the hammer. Then a pause. Then 3 more, deliberate, spaced out. Then a long quiet. Then 2 final strikes, close together, setting something flush. The porch step. The one she had been placing her foot around for 3 weeks. The one that shifted and gave a low complaint every morning when she carried water out. She lay still and listened to the silence after. She did not go out. The candle, she knew, was still burning on the sill. She had not put it out before she came to bed. She had stopped doing that after the first week. The morning of the 13th, she found the step solid under her foot and stopped, just for a moment, before she went on. She did not look back at the house. She carried the water out, and the bucket did not slosh, and she did not think about it again. The day passed, the way the days had learned to pass. The youngest underfoot, the girl at the window watching the road for nothing she could name, the eldest out with his father checking the cattle along the east fence. She put up the last of the plum jars. 12. She counted them twice and wrote the number in the ledger, and then wrote beside it what they had brought from the general store, and what that left against the debt. The number was not good. It was better than it had been. It was not good. She was still at the table when they came in for supper. The youngest came first, tracking mud across the threshold the way he always did, reaching for her skirt, finding her hand and holding 2 of her fingers in his fist, because that was the amount of her he could manage. She let him lead her to the table. The plates were on the shelf. The bread was already cut. The eldest came in behind his father, went to the shelf without looking at her, and set the table the way he always had. 4 places, efficiently, without waste of motion. She was standing at the stove when she heard the 5th plate come down. She heard him carry it to the head of the table and set it down with the particular small sound of ceramic on wood. She turned the bread with her hand. She did not turn around. They sat. She brought the pot and sat down, and the youngest looked at his plate and then up at her face, and his expression collected itself into something deliberate. Her name came out of him loud and blunt and pleased with itself. He looked around the table to see who had heard. The eldest looked at his plate. The rancher cut his meat. Nobody said anything. It was the kind of quiet that is not empty. She kept her eyes on her food until she was sure of her face, and then she looked up at the youngest and nodded once, as though he had answered a question correctly. The candle on the sill had burned down 2 hours yet from guttering. The rancher looked at it the way he had begun to look at it, not at the flame, but at the tin holder, at the wax, at the small fact of it still burning. Then his eyes moved to her hands around her cup, then to the window. The dark outside was full and close. The morning of November 14th came in cold and white at the edges, the grass stiff with the first hard frost of the season. She was up before the children. The candle on the sill had burned through the night and gone out sometime before dawn, leaving a thin thread of smoke in the still air of the kitchen. She did not relight it. She had the books open on the table when she heard the buggy on the road. Not the rancher's step in the yard. The particular weight of iron wheels on frozen ground, coming from the direction of town. He heard it too. She could tell by the way the back door opened without her calling him. He came in and looked at the table. The ledger. The 2 columns she had kept for 23 days in her small, level hand. The receipts folded inside the back cover. The 14 jars of plum preserve entered against the store's payment. The note from the Mennonite widow, 2 miles east, recording 6 jars and 2 days' labor exchanged for the second cow, whose breath she could see now from the kitchen window, standing in the yard beside the first. He picked up the ledger, turned to the last page, set it down. He went outside to meet the agent. She put water on and watched through the window. The agent climbed down from the buggy with his case and his particular expression of a man who expects to be the most important person in a yard. The rancher met him at the gate. She could not hear the words. She watched the rancher take the ledger from the porch rail where he had set it and hold it out. The agent opened it, turned pages. His expression did not change quickly, but it changed. They stood at the gate for some time. When the rancher came back inside, he set the ledger on the table and opened it to the last page and picked up the pen she had left there. He turned the page to the note, the remaining balance, the figure she had worked 3 weeks to pull down to something that would not take the land. He wrote both their names on the line provided, his first, then hers beside it, without pause, without looking up. He capped the pen. He went back outside and she followed him. The agent took the signed note, said what agents say, and climbed back into his buggy. They watched it go. The road was pale with frost. The buggy grew small and then smaller and then was only a sound. She had her coffee. He had his. He set his cup on the porch rail beside hers. The frost did not lift for another hour. Neither of them moved.